here's a beautiful 2008 Bullitt Mustang. Gonna tell you the good, the bad. You might think about buying one if you're smart as this guy and get a deal. Now, this Bullitt was purchased 3 years ago for $9 grand. The only thing he modified was the hood. Doesn't have the stock Bullitt hood. It only had 60,000 miles on it. Now, here's a lesson when you buy used cars. He was a smart guy. He was in the Army, and he went to this place in South Carolina. They were asking 17, but he got his federal credit loan for 9, came with the check, and they took the $9,000 check and gave him the car. Don't ever pay what they're asking. After all, it's only worth what anybody's going to pay for the vehicle. Now, he took it for a road test before he bought it, and he said he thinks he got it about 3 feet up in the air, and he heard a noise and noticed that the right front tie rod had broken. Did that deter him from buying the car? No, it didn't. He bought it and fixed the tie rod. If you're a serious driver and you ever driven one of these, yeah, you'll probably fall in love with it. Unbeknownst to him, he made a brilliant decision, which I'm going to show you right here. This baby, being a 2008, has a 5-speed standard transmission. These are virtually indestructible transmissions. But if you would have bought a later model one with the 6-speed transmission that was made in China, those things were terrible standard transmissions. She took it to the track. Ford said, sure, you can take them to the track. She blew 3 of those standard transmissions racing around, and Ford replaced them, but it was with the same Chinese-made unit. When the 4th one broke, she said, take it back, I don't want it anymore. Ford took the whole vehicle back. They were just not made that well. They had a class action suit against them because people said, hey, the transmissions had problems. They either fixed them or replaced them. But they fixed them with the same parts or replaced them with the same transmission. They kept breaking and breaking. She went through 3 that they had replaced and then just gave up and gave them the car back. They weren't good transmissions. Here again we show, you don't want something complex like that made in China. The quality isn't there. But getting this one so cheap with 60,000 miles on it, he got an even better deal than what he thought. We'll look under the hood and explain more. V8 engine puts out about 315 horsepower. As in its name, Bullitt, these engines are relatively bulletproof. Now, the original Bullitt in 1968 only put out 20 more horsepower and it was modified. It put out 335. And strangely enough, if you go down the road here a ways to Henderson, Tennessee, the original Bullitt lives there. Rather ironic. If you're thinking about buying one of these, here's a handy tip. You look at the Bullitt, okay, it's got the number here. You want to make sure it matches the VIN number of the car. A lot of guys try to make fake ones. That'll show you whether it's a real one or not. It means a lot in the resale value. Now, of course, you can bump the power up as much as you want. This one is still relatively stock. You can put a supercharger on it if you want. You can do whatever you want. But this thing was dynoed, and it was a little bit over 300 horsepower to the wheels. That's plenty of power for getting this thing around. And you do have to realize one thing about Bullets. Like an actual Bullitt, they're very fast. But they also use gasoline up really fast. I drove a new one for a week years ago. I got about 3 miles a gallon. Now, mind you, I was driving like an absolute lunatic. But this guy here, he went to the airport in Nashville and back, which is only like 100-something mile round trip, and he used up 3/4 of a tank of gas. Buy this for looks and for sound. We'll start her up and you can see what I'm talking about. Nothing beats that sound of a Ford V8. You don't even have to go anywhere. I could just sit there all day and listen to it. Why waste your money on a radio? It's got its own sound system. Now, as you can see, it's pretty much retro. They got a lot of old Bullitt styles in it. The seats, the interior. Hey, if you didn't look at the outside of the car, you could think it's a classic Mustang from the 60s. A real gear shift, not those stupid paddle shifters. It's upgraded, slotted and drilled discs, front and back. And unlike the original Mustang, it can go, but it can also stop quite well. That was a problem with the original ones. They didn't stop all that well. Many of them ended up hitting trees. You wonder why people buy these things? This is why they buy these things. You step on the gas. Oh man, smooth acceleration. Oh, and the sound. It's just Too much. Okay, so what have we learned with this Bullet? Some interesting things, especially for you guys that are buying cars, maybe modifying cars. Okay, a little bit less horsepower than the newer ones. Still goes like stink. They can run forever. They're solid. They put out good horsepower, make a great sound, and they can last forever. Say, oh, I don't want this 5-speed tranny, I want the modern 6-speed tranny. Well, in this case, you might change your mind on that too. A class action suit against the 6-speed tranny. These don't have any problems. Plenty of acceleration. Plenty of high-end speed with 5 gears. You don't have to put 6 gears. And in this case, if you swapped it out with a 6-speed, you got a transmission made in China that has notorious problems. This one does not have problems. You're actually better with the older design because the minimal better gas mileage you get with a 6-speed, it isn't going to make much difference. These things drink gasoline. You don't buy one of these and worry about the price of gasoline because you can always do like this gentleman does. He's got a tuner and he can run it on premium gas or regular gas. And guess what he does most of the time? He runs it on regular gas. He doesn't want to pay 30, 40 cents a gallon more for something that sucks gasoline. Because I do swear, I was driving one of these once, and I swore I saw that gas gauge slowly moving. A minute hand and a clock, you know. 2008 like this might be one of the best ones you can get your hand on. You want to avoid the 6-speed standard transmission. Got plenty of horsepower. It can run forever. Back in 2013, when this Avalon was new, you could have gotten a new Camry for about $21,000. You could get the new Avalon for like $31,000. In the United States, the Camry, the Avalon, and the Lexus ES350 are all made in Kentucky. You can get them all with the same engine under the hood, a reliable Toyota V6, and originally all 3 were front-wheel drive, but of course you can get an all-wheel drive Camry now as of 2020. In the case of Avalon, you can get all-wheel drive in 2021. A lot of these things are completely similar. They're all extremely reliable cars. So what do you get spending less for a Camry, more for an Avalon, and even more for a Lexus? As you can see inside, the Avalon, this is a 2013, bear that in mind. Luxurious interior than a 2013 Camry. There's no arguing that. For 2013, it's got the different modes. Now, truthfully, all 3 are relatively similar cars, but the Avalon has a bit more room inside. It's got more space. We look inside, you can see there's a lot of room in the front, quite a bit in the back too. And it's got a deep trunk. They all have big, deep trunks. You get a bit smoother ride in the Avalon, but you get a little bit better gas mileage in the Camry. Take a 2020 Avalon. It goes 0 to 60 in 6 seconds. Now, I've driven and worked on both the Avalons, of course, and the Lexus ES350. I do have to say, the Lexus does ride a little bit better. If you don't mind spending the extra $5,000 for a little more upgraded interior, a little bit fancier, and you just have to have that Lexus nameplate on it, go ahead and get the Lexus. But if you want luxury and not spending the $5 grand, the Avalon's fine. Of course, I'm a cheapskate. If I was going to buy one, I only buy them used anyways. I buy the Camry because I go for the best price I could possibly get. Unless I could find another beautiful used Lexus like my wife's ES300 that I paid $3 grand for when it had 65,000 miles on it. I'm not going to run away from that, but now my wife's spoiled and she says, if it ever wears out, I want another Lexus. So if you want to stay married like I have for the last 43 years, I guess I'd have to get another Lexus. Although, this thing is a long way from going to the junkyard. Even though it's almost 20 years old, still runs and looks like a new car. But you take the Avalon, I mean, this is a 9-year-old car. And look at it. It still looks excellent. The leather seats are still good. It's got a little wear on the leather armrest. That's what happens to all of them. You're going to have that done over. But let's start it up and listen to the engine. Smooth, put in gear, no shaking at all. As we go outside, runs like a top. Everything on it still works. And you have to consider this car is now on its 3rd owner. There were 2 previous owners. The only problem that exists now is there's a noise that sounds like a wheel bearing, so we'll take it for a road test. With 4 people in the car, everybody can stick their head out of the window when we get going to highway speeds to see where the noise is coming from.
I think I hear it.
So we'll jack the car up in the air, spin the wheel. I can hear the wheel bearing grating a little. Now, it doesn't have any particular play in it. It's not dangerous, but if you want to replace this with the factory bearing, you got to replace the whole hub assembly, and the whole job is a $600 job. Personally, I'd let it go. Like I say, there's no play here. The tire's not wearing oddly. I'm assuming that one of the previous two owners probably hit a curb here at some point in time, and over the years it's worn this rear wheel bearing, so you got to replace the hub if you don't like the noise. But it has no play, like I said. The tires aren't wearing odd. Now I'll plug the old scan tool in and see what kind of shape it's in. We'll do the whole vehicle diagnosis, network scan. As we can see, this Avalon has 82,608 miles on it. Says the battery's weak and there's no other problems. All of my 29 modules passed. Typical for a Toyota product. They very rarely have problems. Then I'll look at live data. Now this particular one is running lean. Long-term fuel trim, it's adding 9%. Short-term, it's adding 7.8 and 5. So it probably needs the fuel injection system cleaned. Now this particular vehicle is driven by an older lady. Doesn't drive all that fast. You can do the old Italian tune-up too. Let's say you gotta go someplace that's 100 miles. Go whatever the speed limit. If the speed limit's 75, go 75. That'll help clean the carbon out of the engine. It's running lean, it's adding fuel. And on these, they need to be cleaned out inside the engine. If they drive 30-40 all the time, they don't get fast enough, or the mass airflow sensor could use some cleaning. Here's the mass airflow sensor. Just unscrew it, take it out, unplug it, and clean it with some mass airflow sensor cleaner. I'd actually start there, because if that didn't fix it, I would have the fuel injector's pressure cleaned. I got a machine for that. But a lot of times, cleaning the mass airflow sensor with mass airflow sensor cleaner will make it not run lean anymore. It'll make it run totally fine, and it won't have to add the fuel. So now you know the difference between Camrys, Avalons, and Lexuses. So you can make a wise decision. Get the most economical, lowest price ones. Get a Camry. Quite a bit more luxury. Get an Avalon. And if you have to have a Lexus, get the Lexus. The $5,000 difference between this Avalon and the Lexus here in the United States, they're very similar cars. If you really got to have one versus the other and you want the more expensive end, do like I do. Buy them used. Then the prices get a lot closer and a lot lower than they do when they're brand new. You got to look at the Toyota Sequoia. Now this one came with a little damage. But 4 years ago, the owner only paid $3,000 for this thing with 100,000 miles, and that's not even broken in for one of these engines. Now, if you go into a little history, Toyota started making the Sequoias because they wanted something to compete with the likes of the Ford Excursion. As far as I'm concerned, this is a much better vehicle. The pricing is pretty much the same. From a base model to a loaded model, sometimes the Toyota will be $400 or $500 cheaper. Sometimes the Ford is a few $1,000s more loaded, but they're pretty much in the same price range. Now I like the V8 engine like this one has. The ultra reliable Toyota V8 engine. The only downside to this engine, it has a rubber timing belt and it's an interference engine. So it's a good idea every 100,000 miles to change the water pump and the timing belt and the tensioner so that it won't have any damage to it. Back in the day, 2001, this had a V8. And realize one thing about these three-row people movers. They're all gas hogs. Don't think you're gonna get phenomenal gas mileage. Back in the day, this and the Ford got pretty equivalent gas mileage, which is you're only gonna get in the teens in town. That's just how these things are. The big Excursions, the big Sequoias, most of these Sequoias, they're pushing 3 tons. They're almost 6,000 pounds. And that rating's only empty. You fill it up or tow something, the mileage will go right down. My experience with those are, they're perfectly fine for the first 100,000 miles generally, but then they cost a fortune to repair those engines on the Fords. For a few miles a gallon, I'll take this Toyota V8 engine. I've seen them with 500,000 miles on them and they're still running strong. Now, as you can see, there's plenty of room inside these. Plenty of room here now. There's also plenty of room for all your crap. The other seats are hiding back here. And they got plenty of towing capacity. And if that's not enough for you, they got a luggage rack you can throw a lot of stuff on. Now, odds are you'll never get lucky like this guy did and pick one of these up for $3,000. It was totaled by the insurance company, but all they replaced was the headlamp and stuff, you can see they didn't fix the bumper. Who cares? It still goes down the road. Yeah, you can fix it if you want, but the vehicle itself is still solid as can be. Because let's face it, you're not buying a Sequoia to do rock crawling like it was some kind of a Jeep. These are people movers. They're very comfortable inside. They got a lot of space. You can jump in something like this, drive to California. You're not going to get a sore neck or a sore back. Now, this is 2001, so it's old. Well, let's listen to the motor. Let's start it up. Starts right up. Just listen to that engine. Does it shake? No. The only thing you can hear is a little bit of cam noise, which is normal on any overhead cam engine that's 20 years old. It doesn't burn a drop of oil. Let me tell you something, with this kind of mileage, 20 years old, this has got like 156,000 miles on it. You find one of those excursions by then, they're burning oil quite a bit. A V8 engine doesn't need a turbo. They're gonna last longer. And in the real world, they're gonna get better gas mileage. Because the thing about a turbo is, theoretically, they get better gas mileage because they ram more air into the engine, but unfortunately, there's opposite forces. When you do that, what do you do when you have a turbo? You drive faster because it's got a turbo. So, the faster your engine spins, the higher the RPMs, the worse your gas mileage. From my experience of my own customers over 53 years is the people with turbocharged cars get the worst gas mileage of anybody because they're driving them so hard and you get worse gas mileage. Same thing goes for towing. You start towing a bunch of weight, your gas mileage is going down. You take a V6 engine, you're towing a lot, it's not going to be getting 25 miles a gallon then. And now comes the moment of truth, my German scan tool. We'll see what shape this thing is in from what no one can hide from, the computer. So here we go to diagnostics. With an enhanced vehicle scan. Now it only has one trouble code, PO125A, and actually he's had it for quite some time. Here's the code, insufficient coolant temperature for closed loop. Now, the thermistor's already been changed with the Toyota part, so there's nothing wrong with that. But what we're gonna do is, we're gonna live data here. Now as you can see, we rev it up. The oxygen sensor, bank 1, sensor 2 is going up and down. Oxygen sensor 1, bank 1 is completely dead. It's doing nothing. Now the owner had it replaced, bank 1, sensor 1, oxygen sensor, but it was an aftermarket sensor, which I never advise people to do. The fix for this thing is probably just putting a Toyota Denso, Nippon Denso oxygen sensor on the driver's side. That's bank 1, left side of the engine. Now here's a lesson to be learned. Don't buy a well-made 3-row passenger mover and put cheaper parts on it. Don't go to a discount auto parts store and buy some aftermarket oxygen sensor. On these, you want to stick with the Denso or the Nippon Denso, the ones that they came with. You don't have to buy them at the dealer. You can buy them anywhere. Toyota doesn't make them. They buy them from Denso. I believe Toyota owns some portion of that company, but then again, Toyota owns parts of lots of things. Mazda, Subaru, they own lots of things. But you don't want to use another brand, especially like Bosch. And you might say, Scotty, use the Bosch scan tool. They make great scan tools, but they don't make oxygen sensors for all cars that work correctly. Some Fords come with Bosch, work perfectly fine. This didn't. You don't want to put a Bosch sensor on it. But on the other hand, if you ever come across one of these and you can buy it for $3,000 with 101,000 miles on it and it runs as good as this one does, get your money out before somebody else beats you to it. They built these things to last. Check this out. The guy paid $7 grand for it a couple of years ago. The only thing he's done to it is put a fuel pump and a power steering pump on it. And even though, as you can see, got 183,000 miles on it, listen to this. Starts right up, sounds like a dream. No misfires. Smooth engine, not shaking. Now the owner admits it burns oil. If he changes the oil after 5,000 miles, in between he has to add about half a quart of oil. No biggie. I've seen new ones that in that period of time would go through 5 or 6 quarts of oil, and GM would say, oh well, that's normal on these engines. Seriously, they don't make them like they used to. The modern ones, I see the transmission's going out early. This one's still got the original transmission. It's just like a dream. Got a full-size bed, and he's going to be putting these rally wheels on later. And the advantage of these older ones, like this 97 is, you can do a lot of modifications yourself. You don't need to have a bunch of computers to modify stuff. You can still play around with these things. And being a 1500, there are parts all over the place. You can trade for them. You can buy them on eBay. There's all kinds of parts available for these things relatively cheaply, so you can play to your heart's content without spending a small fortune. Brand new 2021 Silverado, they start for about $34,900. Paid $7,000 for this 2 years ago, and it's still running fine. Even if the engine and transmission went out and he had to spend a few thousands fixing them, it's worth it. These things are solid. If they don't rust out, they can last forever. And let's check the undercarriage out. Here we have the frame. Solid as can be. You're always going to see superficial rust. That means nothing. This frame is solid as can be. You can see it's a real truck. It's got a solid frame, and then the bed is bolted onto the frame. This is not some unibody pile of junk. And another reason these are great, they got strong differentials in the back to drive the rear wheels. This is a rear-wheel drive pickup truck. The differential in this truck was made in the United States. And if you know anything about late model Silverados, their rear ends go out all the time. And it took this genius in Florida to figure out why, where he studied the rear ends and found out that they were made in Mexico and they were not building them correctly. So the way they were building them, they were not tightening them up tight enough. The internal bearings would have the equivalent slack of a rear end that had 80 or 90,000 miles. This is fresh out of the factory. And then I had customers have 50, 60,000 miles on their new Silverados. The rear ends went out, started howling because they were not made correctly in Mexico. This baby was made in the United States. It's still working fine. Now it looks fine, it's solid. Let's check the electronics out because that never lies. So I'll hook the old scan tool up, turn it on, and here we go. It's an old car, so this is going to take a while to get all this data out. The new ones are a lot faster, but it still gets a lot of information. Now in this case, there's 3 codes, so let's check them out. The catalyst efficiency is low, bank 1 and bank 2, and there's a little bit of a misfire, which doesn't surprise me at all because has the exhaust been modified, as you can hear. And you can hear a little bit of pops here and there. When you modify the exhaust and have it free flow like that, it's often going to mess with the catalytic converter data, and every once in a while you're going to get a pop. Well, that pop is a misfire. What's a good thing this thing is in Tennessee? You don't really have to worry about all the pollution control stuff because they don't check for it anymore, unless you live around Nashville. Now we're going to look at the live data. And we want to look at the computer system. Well, we got all kinds of information to look at. We'll start looking through it. Your fuel ratio is 14.7 to 1. This has 183,000 miles on it. You know what perfect air fuel ratio is? 14.7 to 1. So it's still running perfectly. See, the injector average on bank 2 is 3 milliseconds, and on bank 1 it's 3 milliseconds. That means that the engine's perfectly balanced. If one was off from the other, there's a problem. The engine would roll because one side would be firing different than the other, but these are exactly the same, which is what you want. Now, as we look at the misfire current, you can see there's, okay, they just went to 2 count. The others are all 0. So the number 4 cylinder's having a very minor misfire. Like I say, that's generally because the exhaust system, you're going to get a little popping here and there. You see, when we rev it up, the count goes back to 0. That proves my point. When you're going fast, it doesn't care. But at an idle, with the exhaust being taken off like this and loud, it's got a little bit of a ding. But when you rev it up, it doesn't misfire. So who cares? Transmission data. Here's the 2 to 3 shift. What do we have here? 2 to 3 shift error, 0.44 seconds. That isn't much. With this kind of mileage, so what if it takes a little bit less than half of a second for it to shift from 2nd to 3rd gear? We're not in that big of a hurry, are we? 3 to 4 shift time is instantaneous. It's 0, which doesn't surprise me at all. I often see these in these. 3 to 4, there's less power going. 1st to 2nd and 2nd to 3rd is when guys are really gunning it to take off. So those are the gears that'll wear more than the higher gears, and this just proves the 3 to 4 shift, it doesn't take any time at all to shift because that's the one that has less wear. But all in all, hey, it runs pretty good. We'll take it for a road test. Here we go around the neighborhood. You're up nice and high. Still rides pretty good. And here we go. You can feel it. We're shifting. Pretty smooth shift if you ask me. I'm not whining about it. The computer might say it's off 0.44 of a second, but feels pretty good to me. Now we're getting out on the country road here. See what this old truck can do. Still's got good acceleration. Let's listen to the tranny. I don't call that a rough shift at all myself. She's pretty smooth to me. So now you know the truth about why these old Silverados are a heck of a lot better than the ones they've been building for the last 8 or 10 years. So if you never want to miss another one of my new car repair videos, remember to ring that bell.